The night over Gangnam was a sea of glass and neon, a glittering beast that swallowed fortunes whole. High above it all, in a penthouse perched like a predator, the only sounds were the whisper of cold air and the distant hum of a city that knew better than to disturb its owner. This was the kingdom of Kwon Jihan, head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate. His name was a currency of fear, spoken in hushed tones in both boardrooms and back alleys. His empire was built on silence and precision. But tonight, that silence was about to break. It was 2 in the morning. A deal with the Yakuza had just gone sour, leaving the bitter taste of betrayal in the air. Jihan paced his home, a cold cavern of marble and minimalist art. He wasn't tired. He was coiled, a spring of violent energy looking for a release. And that's when he heard it. A noise. It wasn't a threat, not an intruder. It was too small. A faint, rhythmic scratching from the service kitchen. A mouse, maybe. Or a thief. In his house, both were dealt with in the same, permanent way. He moved like a ghost through his own home. The sound led him to the walk-in pantry, a room stocked with enough delicacies to feed a small army. The door was cracked open. He pushed it, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. And there, on the floor, was the source of the noise. It wasn't a mouse. It was a child. A little black girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, huddled by a large sack of premium dog food, a special blend for his 2 prized Gyeongju dogs, animals that ate better than most people in the city. Her tiny, trembling hands were full of dry kibble, which she was pushing into her mouth with a desperate, secret hunger. She froze when she saw him, her eyes widening with pure terror. The kibble was scattered across the pristine floor. Kwon Jihan just stared. His first thought was cold and clinical. A trespasser, the daughter of a staff member. He vaguely recognized her as the child of his head maid, a woman who was quiet, efficient, and basically invisible. But that thought was instantly drowned by a wave of ice-cold anger. Stealing. In his pantry. From his dogs. The disrespect was staggering. His entire world ran on one simple rule. You don't take what belongs to Kwon Jihan. What do you think you're doing? His voice was a low growl, the kind that had made grown men crumble. The little girl didn't say a word. She just trembled, trying to press herself into the wall as if she could disappear. Tears welled up, leaving silent, terrified tracks on her thin face. She was a cornered animal, and every one of Jihan's instincts told him to just eliminate the problem. He stepped forward, ready to grab her, to drag her and her mother out, to make an example of them. But as his hand reached for her, the light caught something on her skin. He stopped. His hand froze in the air, just inches from her shoulder. It wasn't just grime. They were bruises. Dark, ugly splotches of purple and blue on her upper arm, disappearing under the sleeve of her thin t-shirt. They were shaped like fingerprints. Someone had gripped her. Hard. His focus snapped. The anger he'd felt about the theft curdled into something else, something hotter and way more dangerous. He crouched down, not caring about the crease in his expensive suit. He moved slowly, like you would with a spooked animal. "Let me see your arm," he said. It was still a command, but the ice in his voice was gone, replaced by a simmering heat. She flinched, but didn't fight as he gently took her arm and pushed back the flimsy sleeve. His breath caught. The bruises weren't just on her arm. They trailed up her shoulder, and he could see more marks on her back through the thin fabric of her shirt. This wasn't from a fall. This was deliberate. This was chronic. He looked at her face again, but this time, he really saw her. The hollows under her eyes weren't just from being up late. They were the sunken pits of long-term hunger. Her cheeks were gaunt. This child was a fragile collection of bones, and someone had been treating her with cruelty. The dog food scattered on the floor suddenly looked less like a theft and more like a verdict. A judgment on his entire household. "Who did this to you?" he asked. His voice was dangerously quiet now. The simmer was turning into a boil. The little girl, whose name he didn't even know, just shook her head, tears streaming freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice tiny and broken. "I was hungry. Mommy said. Mommy said Ms. Choi gets angry if I eat before the work is done. She said there's no dinner if I'm a bother." Ms. Choi, the head housekeeper, a woman who ran the staff with an iron fist, someone he paid a fortune to make sure his home ran like a perfect machine. A machine that, apparently, was grinding a child into dust. He thought of the girl's mother, a timid woman who came before sunrise and left after sunset, a ghost cleaning up after his world of excess. He remembered her asking once if her daughter could have some leftover fruit from a party. He'd been on a call, annoyed at the interruption, and had just waved her away. The memory, so meaningless then, now felt like a shard of glass in his gut. The rage inside him finally found its target. This wasn't his usual cold, calculated anger. This was a white-hot fury, a protective fire he hadn't felt in years. He had built a fortress of fear where every rule was obeyed. And right under his nose, in the heart of that fortress, a child was being starved and beaten. His authority hadn't just been challenged. It had been corrupted in the ugliest way possible. He looked from the girl's bruised arm to the kibble on the floor. His dogs were treated better than the child of a woman who served him. The thought was so disgusting, so unacceptable, that it made everything else fade away. The Yakuza, the betrayals, the entire world of violence he lived in, it all vanished. In that moment, there was only this broken little girl and the monster who had hurt her. He stood up slowly. The girl flinched, bracing for a hit. Instead, he just looked down at her and made a silent promise. The child wasn't the problem. The system that let this happen was. And he was about to tear that system apart with his bare hands. Jihan scooped the little girl into his arms. She was so light she felt like she might just float away, a tiny bundle of fear and bones. She went stiff, probably thinking he was about to throw her out, but his grip was surprisingly secure, almost gentle. He carried her out of the pantry and into the main kitchen, a vast, sterile space of stainless steel and granite. He sat her on a high stool at the massive kitchen island, where she looked like a doll that had been swallowed by the room. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice now flat and empty of all emotion. "Don't move." He walked to the staff wing, his footsteps echoing like gunshots on the marble floor. He didn't knock on Miss Choi's door. He kicked it clean off its hinges. Miss Choi, a stern woman in her 50s, shot up in bed, her face a mask of shock that quickly melted into fear. "Mr. Kwon, what is the meaning of pack?" Jihan said, his voice as cold and sharp as a razor. "You have 5 minutes. Then my men will remove you. You can leave on your feet, or you can leave in a bag. Your choice." Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. She knew that tone. It was the voice he reserved for his enemies. "But, sir, what did I do?" she finally stammered. Jihan stepped into the room, and for the first time, Miss Choi saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was the calm, detached look of a man about to erase a problem. "You starved a child in my house," he said, each word landing like a hammer blow. "You put your hands on her. In my house, we have rules. You didn't just break one. You broke something fundamental. Now get out." He didn't wait for her to answer. He turned, walked out, and pulled out his phone. He made 2 calls. The first was to his head of security. "Miss Choi is no longer an employee. Escort her out. Make sure she takes nothing. And make sure she understands that if she's ever seen within a kilometer of this building again, she will cease to exist." The second call was to his personal chef. "Kitchen. Now. I want a meal. Not for me. For a child." When Jihan got back to the kitchen, the girl was right where he'd left her, her little hands gripping the seat. She watched him with wide, uncertain eyes. He went to the huge refrigerator, pulled out a carton of milk, and poured a glass. He set it in front of her. "Drink," he said. She stared at the glass like it might be a trap. Tentatively, she reached for it and took a small sip. Then another. Soon, she was drinking it down like she'd been lost in a desert. Minutes later, the chef, Mr. Park, rushed in, still fumbling with his uniform buttons. "Sir? You called." He looked around, expecting to see a late-night meeting of Jihan's associates. Instead, he saw the most feared man in Seoul standing next to a tiny, scared-looking girl. "I want you to cook," Jihan said. "Everything. The best you've got. I want the highest-grade Hanwoo beef, japchae, scallion pancakes, steamed fish, soft tofu stew. Every side dish you can think of. I want a feast. And I want it in 30 minutes." The chef just stared. "A feast? Sir, for her." Jihan's gaze was solid. "Yes, for her. Cook like you're cooking for the most important guest you've ever had. Because tonight you are." For the next half hour, the silent kitchen became a storm of activity. The sizzle of beef, the smell of garlic and sesame oil, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. Through it all, Jihan just stood there, arms crossed, watching. The little girl watched too, her eyes wide with a look of dawning wonder. The air filled with the smells of care and abundance, a language she had probably never known. When the food was ready, the chef laid it out on the island. Plate after plate of steaming, incredible food. Enough for 10 people. The little girl just stared at the mountain of dishes, her face a perfect picture of disbelief. Jihan pulled up a chair for her, lifted her from the stool, and set her down. He took a small bowl, filled it with rice, and placed a piece of perfectly cooked beef on top. He put it in front of her. "Eat," he said again, his voice softer now. She looked up at him, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was mixed with a tiny, fragile spark of trust. She picked up the small spoon, her hand still trembling, and took a bite. Her eyes fluttered closed. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of fear. It was relief. She started to eat, slowly at first, and then with a quiet intensity that cracked something open deep inside Jihan's chest. He just watched her eat, this tiny stranger in his giant world. He had ordered acts of unimaginable violence, built an empire on calculated cruelty. But watching this child eat a real meal, a meal he ordered for her, felt like the most powerful thing he had ever done. It wasn't about destroying something. It was about protecting something. And in that moment, Quan Jihan, the cold-hearted boss of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, felt the foundation of his brutal world start to shift. This is a work of fiction, of course. It's a story about how a single moment can compel a man to confront the world he has created. It explores the idea that real change doesn't always come from big battles, but from quiet, unexpected acts of protection. We see stories about ruthless men all the time, but it's the crack in their armor that really pulls us in. If you believe that even the hardest hearts can find a reason to change, and that compassion can be a greater power than cruelty, go ahead and like this video and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're from, and what part of this story hit you the hardest. The feast was only the beginning. While the child ate, he learned her name was Annabelle. Ate until she was full, Jihan made another call, this time to the manager of the staff apartments. The head maid's apartment, Jihan said, his voice flat. It's not good enough. I'm moving her and her daughter into the West Wing guest suite. Immediately. Get it ready. Silk sheets. A full wardrobe for both of them. My assistant has their sizes. And fill the child's room with toys. Everything a 6-year-old could possibly want. I want it to look like a palace by morning. Understood. The West Wing guest suite was bigger than most people's homes, reserved for visiting dignitaries, with a private balcony overlooking the Han River. The manager was stunned into silence, but he knew better than to question the order. When Annabelle's mother, Grace, arrived for her shift before dawn, she was met by Jihan's personal assistant, not the tyrant Miss Choi. Pale with worry and having heard about the dramatic firing, she was sure she and her daughter were next. She was braced for homelessness. Instead, she was led to the private elevator and up to the West Wing. When the doors to the suite opened, she gasped. The place was filled with flowers. The smaller bedroom had been transformed into a child's dream, with a canopy bed, dolls, art supplies, and a mountain of stuffed animals. In the master bedroom, the closets were full of new clothes for both of them. Quan Jihan was standing by the window, watching the sunrise. He turned as she walked in. Mr. Quan, she started, her voice shaking. I don't understand. I'm so sorry for what Annabelle did. I will punish. You will do no such thing. Jihan cut her off, his voice firm but not angry. Your daughter did nothing wrong. She was hungry. The failure was mine. This house failed her. I failed her. Grace just stared at him, tears welling up. The most powerful, untouchable man she knew was taking the blame. From now on, Jihan continued, you are not a maid. Your only job is to be Annabelle's mother. You will live here. Your salary is quadrupled. Annabelle will be enrolled in the best international school in Seoul. A car will take her. She will have tutors, doctors, and anything she needs. You report only to me. And your first duty is to make sure she never feels hunger or fear in this house again. Is that clear? Grace could only nod, tears of pure shock and gratitude streaming down her face. The news sent ripples through the syndicate. Word got around. The boss had a new priority. His men, used to his cold-blooded focus, started seeing a different side of him. He was still a shark in his business dealings, but his evenings changed. He'd often have dinner not with his captains, but at a small table in the suite, listening to Annabelle chatter about her day at school. One evening, Annabelle held up a crayon drawing. It showed a big, serious-looking man in a black suit, a smiling woman, and a little girl in the middle, holding both their hands. Above them, she had drawn a huge, golden dragon. It's us, she said, her voice bright and confident now. You're the dragon, uncle. Uncle. The word hit him harder than a fist. He'd been called boss, sir, monster, king. Never uncle. He looked at the drawing, at this crude picture of their strange new family, and felt that crack in his chest widen, letting in a light he never knew was missing. But this new life had new dangers. His enemies, always watching for a weakness, saw his bond with the woman and child as a target. A rival faction decided to test him. They tried to use Annabelle as leverage. It was a fatal mistake. They didn't find a softer, weaker man. They found a man who now had something to protect, something worth more than all his money and territory combined. The rage he'd unleashed on Ms. Choi was a flicker compared to the cold, systematic fire he rained down on those who threatened his new family. He didn't just beat them. He erased them from the earth, sending a crystal-clear message to the entire underworld. The maid and her daughter were under the Golden Dragon's protection, and the dragon's fire had never been hotter. Months later, Jihan was tucking Annabelle into her massive bed. She was no longer the frail, scared child from the pantry. She was happy and healthy. "Uncle," she said sleepily, her hand in his. "Why were you so angry that first night?" Jihan sat on the edge of her bed, a place he could have never imagined himself. He thought about the memory of her bruised arm and the dog food on the floor. "I wasn't angry at you, Annabelle," he said softly. "I was angry because my house was dark, and I didn't even know it. You turned on the light." She smiled, and her eyes fluttered shut. He sat there for a long time, just listening to her breathe. His world was still violent and dangerous. He was still a man to be feared. But now, in the heart of his dark kingdom, there was a small, fiercely protected pocket of light. A little girl's room. A home. The ruthless mafia boss who had everything had finally found the one thing he never knew he needed. He hadn't just saved a starving child. In the end, she had saved him, too. He had found his weakness, and in doing so, he had found his true strength.